My former car was a Toyota. また、微妙な違いが出てきましたね。ちょうど先日、生徒さんが話してました。こういう英語をですね、大したことないと思う方がいるかもしれませんが、ちょっと、なんていうのかな、マニアック的な部分がありますからね。そういうところが好きです。でもね、こういう仕事、英会話スクールでずっとやってますので、ずっとやってます。そういう授業中にそういう細かいところをわざわざ指摘するのは難しい時もあります。普段はそこまで直しません。特にね、その初心者の方が英語を話すのが怖くなるという可能性がありますので、ちょっと気をつけています。しかし、ここは YouTube ですから、そういうところについて自由に話せますよね。今まで自分が感じてきたことをちゃんと出して、どうしてこういう言い方が不自然なのか、どういうふうに直した方がいいのかをしっかりお伝えします。今回はそんな感じで始めたいと思います。To make things flow nice and smoothly, we'll split it into 4 logical steps. We'll look at the problem, the reason, the solution, and some example sentences. Shall we make a start? First, let's look at the problem. My former car was a Toyota. My former car was a Toyota. I've often had these thoughts running around in my head and thought to myself, is it just me? Sometimes I have to get in touch with some of my English-speaking friends just to make sure I'm not imagining it. My former car was a Toyota. This kind of thing starts to sound normal the longer I live in Japan. But no, I will not be tricked. The grammar is fine, but there is definitely something iffy going on in this sentence. Wow, look at that car! What a beauty! You really love cars, don't you? Have done all my life. So, what are you driving? I've got a Subaru Forester. That's a big SUV, right? Yeah, it's perfect for the family. Plenty of space for the kids and all your stuff. Loads of space. But you know, I've not always been a Subaru driver. Oh yeah, my former car was a Toyota. Your former car? That's right, my former car was a Toyota. Former? That's kind of a funny way to say it. How about you? What are you driving these days? Oh, I don't drive. I cycle everywhere on my unicycle. So it's pretty obvious that the word we're focusing on is former. Why does it sound so odd to me? Let's take a deep dive in the next section. I've got a few things to go over. The moment I heard the person referring to their car as my former car, alarm bells went off. The word former is commonly used in English to describe a role, a position, or a status that a person or an organization had previously held. This is often used in a formal or professional context, so that is a big point. I guess in terms of meaning, it's almost the same as the Japanese expressions 前の仕事、元の状態、以前のバージョン。So in English conversation, what situations can we use former in its usual way? I've broken it down into 3 parts. Referring to a past role or title. The former president of the company retired last year. She's a former Olympic champion. Describing previous relationships or associations. My former boss was really supportive. He caught up with his former classmates at the reunion. Contrasting with the current state. The building, a former factory, has been turned into a museum. My former apartment was smaller, but it had a great view. So using former works best when emphasizing a big change or transition. But it does sound really formal and makes the topic sound rather significant or like it's a big deal. If you're talking about business though, don't disregard it completely. It is used formally. One place that we often hear the word former being used is when we're talking about world leaders, former presidents, former prime ministers, that kind of thing. But when you're just talking about your car, former seems like it's just a little bit too much. We need to aim for something a bit more casual. The first word I'm going to talk about may take some of you by surprise. Some of you, not all of you, I'd say using the word old is probably the most natural way to say it. Now, some of you may be thinking, old just sounds old. My car wasn't all that old, you know. I had only had it for a couple of years. Of course, old is used for things that really are old, but it's also used in the sense of the one that I had before this one. Even if your car was only a year old, we can still use old in this sense because we're using it in a slightly different way. So that means we can say, my old car was a Toyota. My old apartment was in Ueno. My old job paid really well. My old boyfriend was so annoying. In all of those sentences, I don't mean old as in the literal sense. It doesn't sound like that to me at all. I mean it in the one before this one sense. Now, another good way to talk about this kind of thing is by explaining in more detail. It may take a bit more sentence building, but it sounds nice and natural. The car I had before this one. The car I drove before this one. The apartment I rented before this one. The apartment I lived in before this one. The girl I used to see before I met you. The girl I was with before I met you. Those all sound very conversational and much better than using former. My former girlfriend, ooh, it just sounds clunky and not all that cool. One thing you may be wondering about is the word previous. Again, it's a very formal word and it's very similar in meaning to former. I guess they're pretty good friends. It's a great word, but it sounds kind of funny to say my previous car. Yeah, it's best to stick with the examples I gave you. I met up with a few people from my old job and we just picked up where we left off. So can you see I used old even for when talking about the job I used to have? Does it sound funny? Not to me. And the expression we picked up where we left off means we got back into our old routines, the same old jokes, just like we used to. I hear you met a famous footballer. I met the former captain and manager of Liverpool FC, Kenny Dalglish. King Kenny. So when we're talking about people like a sporting legend, someone like that, then we use former. Why do we use the word former? Well, it sounds like you're really respecting them and you're like, I don't know, they're like really special people. So to use the word former sounds like they're kind of like up here and it's like you're respecting their amazing careers. A former player for Liverpool FC and a former manager. Fantastic. Oh no, here comes my ex-boss. Better brace myself for an awkward conversation. When you brace yourself, it means you get ready. It's often used for something dangerous or really uncomfortable and awkward. It's often used in the short sentence, brace yourself. I got myself a new smartphone. I only had my old one for about a year, but I just felt like a change. So even although the smartphone was only a year old, we can still refer to it as being old, meaning the one before this one, my old smartphone. We all remember our old cars, don't we? I remember my first car in Japan, a Suzuki Cultus. What a car! It was a real beauty. I really liked that car. So how about you? What was your first ever car? If you want to talk about it, leave your comments down below. Could be an interesting conversation.